Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Coffee Talk Hybrid, if you will. I think most of you had received our email last week discussing some of the changes we had made to the CECLSolver. Admittedly, we did not communicate these changes as successfully as we'd like. So first and foremost, my apology to all of you for not doing a better job of that. I think in our continual search to improve the tool, we probably were overestimated or underestimated, excuse me, the impact that these changes would have because of the not communicating them effectively enough. So first and foremost, just let me say I'm sorry, but it is our ongoing and desire to improve the tool where we can, and we felt like with prior to January 1st, everything we had kind of presented was with the idea of trying to demonstrate the cumulative impact or potential impact that the ACL or CECL would have for your institution. Now that we're into January in 2023, where now this will be the methodology moving forward, we felt like it was important now to show the information as you'll present it, moving forward. And that results in 3 different reserve accounts that need to be, established and then potentially modified, quarter to quarter. So that was really the fundamental piece that we were trying to update the tool for. Again, our apologies for not communicating it better. We're going to discuss that today. Steve has also done a little video that hopefully you've received as well. So we're available to even be on this call to talk through anything with you want. But again, first and foremost, that's why we're here today. And Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you just to kind of walk them through the changes.
Sure.
Steve, I think you're not hearing you yet. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Still can't hear me?
All right, well, bear with us 1 second. Oh, okay.
How's that? Good?
Oh, Steve, you're fine. It's me, so.
Oh, all right. Okay, let me share my screen here.
I can hear you now. There you go. It's fine.
Excellent. There. Okay, can you see my presentation there?
I can, thank you.
Excellent. That's Sean. I'm Steve, and digging right into the. So as Sean was saying, prior to the our adoption of CECL at the beginning of this year, the emphasis was on comparing the total impact of what this change to a new methodology was going to mean for your bank. So we looked at the impact to the loan loss reserve, we looked at the impact to your securities portfolio, and we looked at the impact to your unfunded commitments. And we calculated at the sort of the bottom of the summary page a total CECL impact value, which is again designed to quantify everything that was going to be the total impact. But now that we're neck deep in accounting entries for those adjustments, and we want to shift our focus to focusing on the actual specific line item changes to your call reports and your financial statements. And we felt like emphasizing a total impact calculation, which was helpful in planning for CECL, but what was not helpful in specific call report or financial statement line items, was more misleading and more confusing than clarifying. And so we thought the relevant thing to do would be to redesign, not really redesign, but move some stuff around a little bit on the summaries to emphasize that we have a calculation for your reserve, the old ALLL, right? The contra asset line item on your balance sheet, right under your gross loans, is a value that needs to be clear and presented as such. And then the adjustment to your unfunded commitments, or the reserve that you need to establish for your unfunded commitments, is in a whole separate side of the balance sheet. It's on the other liabilities side of the balance sheet for your call reports and financial statements. And then the securities portfolio would be an adjustment to your gross securities. So you're showing it net of any of that reserve. is how we show the securities balance on Schedule RC, the call report. So we wanted to separate them conceptually, or separate them on the tool, because conceptually we want to think of them differently as separate and independent at this point. So that was kind of the idea for it. So again, well, I guess I've already skipped ahead into what has changed. We have our loan portfolio ACL, or allowance for credit losses. That's the old loan loss reserve that lives right below gross loans on your financial statement. That's still on the summary tab. The ACL for securities has always been on the HTM securities tab of our tool, and is still there. It's just no longer also on the bottom of the summary added up with the other two. And the same concept for the unfunded commitment. So the calculation for the unfunded commitments has always been and is still available on the unfunded commitments tab. It's no longer added with the other two at the bottom of the summary tab. So just to be clear, what it looked like before, we had our let's say for this sample institution, 16 million in CECL in ACL for the collectively assessed pool. Then we added in the individual assessments. Then we added in the securities adjustment and the unfunded commitments to get a total CECL impact calculation, which is not a specific line item on the call report. This is the way the call report looks now. And so for your March 31st call report, these are the three specific and somewhat independent line items that we have to deal with. There is the adjustment to, or under securities for held to maturity securities. That's not a separate line item for the reserve. It's just netted out of the gross. So when you type in your gross, your value for held to maturity securities, it will be net of any ACL requirement. And the footnote, by the way, footnote 3 on the call report there says exactly what I just said. Then separately, you have your allowance for loan and lease losses, which is the old ALLL. That's the new loan portfolio ACL. And then thirdly, I would say last but not least, but it's a little bit least, is on the other liabilities section. You have, well, line item 20 is sort of a catch-all bucket, right? All other liabilities from Schedule RCG. RCG up there on the top right, that shows all the different, quote, other liabilities, one of them being the reserve account established for the allowance for credit losses on the unfunded commitments or off balance sheet credit exposure. So now that we have those three separate items, we want to focus the summary, the loan portfolio summary. We're focusing on calculating that ACL for the loan portfolio. On the HTM securities tab, we're focusing on calculating the reserve necessary for the securities. And on the unfunded commitments, we're focusing on that. So that's a summary of the changes and why we're showing those values. Again, that value has always been, the unfunded commitments tab actually doesn't look, it looks identical to the way it always has. We just aren't also taking that surplus shortfall concept and adding it in on the summary page in a way that was helpful in communicating overall impact, but could be more confusing than helpful in calculating your specific line item adjustments. John?
Thanks, Steve. And so
Sure.
again, I think we will, I just had a chat in from Barry. Good morning, Barry. We will be sending out a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording as we always do. But I think, again, just immediately this calls to mind, why we did this, right? Is we just felt like, as Steve indicated, that this would just give us a much more appropriate representation of what you'll be doing, quarter to quarter, which was different from what we were doing leading up to implementation on this. So hopefully, again, this helps to start to better understand why we made the change, how it'll work. I do think we will end up providing a summary page to, again, at least recapture or display some of those cumulative effects, because I think a lot of you became comfortable with that, but definitely wanted to just again present the information as you'll be reporting it on your call report. Right. Steve, anything else we need to add or cover?
No, certainly understand, if you came onto the tool last week and saw that change, and it was a bit of a shock to the system because the values that you were expecting to see presented on a certain tab in a certain way have been moved around. And so again, we apologize for doing that with all good intentions, but maybe without the best, clearest communication ahead of time.
Yeah. And so again, I think we'll send out a copy of everything today. You'll have that. Certainly reach out to us next week on the coffee talk. I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit again. We will also have Paul Allen on from Saltmarsh. So I would say, for those of you around here today, and certainly all of our customers, but if there's anything you'd like us to directly speak to Paul about, we'll be happy to. I can tell you, I was just recently at the ICBA convention, kind of talking about CECL and where we are right now. Some of the questions we've gotten from banks, so we'll share those, particularly around unallocated and just different topics we'll address. But if there is something on your mind, because if you'll remember back to our last coffee talk, one of the probably the biggest question for everyone moving forward was, just acceptance by external parties such as auditors and regulators. And so, anything that you've encountered or have questions on or concerns about, relating to that, certainly let us know, and we'll try to make sure we have Paul address those as part of next week's coffee talk. And Mustafa, thanks for the question, the inquiry. Yeah, we will get back to trying to create some type of summary page, because I do think that was really well received by our audience. So we are working on that and to get that out there as soon as we possibly can. So
there's sort of a second part a little bit to that question.
I'm sorry.
It's all right, but you also wanted to know why we're still doing or showing kind of a surplus shortfall on the unfunded commitment, right? And so you'll have an existing calculation for let's say as we move forward on a quarter-to-quarter basis, you're redoing your analysis, and you have an existing reserve for your unfunded commitment, right? Something that you're putting in the other liability section on the balance sheet. And the next quarter, you redo your analysis, you find that it needs to be a little bit higher. So that page will show your existing one of, let's say, 10,000, the newly calculated one of 12,000, and then it would have a shortfall of 2,000. That 2,000 would be the amount that you need to add into your provision on the income statement for that period.
Yeah, so it'll show the delta.
Yeah, exactly. Now the surplus shortfall for the ACL for the whole loan portfolio is a little bit less helpful, because there's more things that go into calculating a loan loss provision, right, than simply just your old reserve, your new reserve, and the difference is your provision. You've got charge-offs, you got recoveries, you have other adjustments going on in there. It's a more complicated calculation. But for something like the unfunded commitment, you simply have your existing reserve for unfunded commitment from the previous, the updated calculation. Any difference has got to go into an expense item on the income statement. By the way the expense items work on the income statement is they are all stuck together in the provision for loan losses, which I find a little bit ironic, or I guess they're just calling it provision for credit losses moving forward. So if you have to make an adjustment to your reserve for unfunded commitments 2 quarters from now, that adjustment on the income statement will just be added to the rest of your loan loss provision as the same line item in on the Schedule RI. There'll be a detail of it in one of the other lesser schedules, but in the summary income statement Schedule RI, all 3 of them are added together. The provision you need, for your loan loss reserve, the provision that you need if you needed to change the unfunded commitment reserve, and the adjustment to the securities as well. All 3 of those are grouped together. I think that's probably poor display on the call on the FDIC's part, but that's their call. They're added together on Schedule RI moving forward.
And Steve, maybe just for a second, can you go back to the call report page? Because this is actually something, I know one of the questions, and I'm going to give you my take on it. This is a question we'll ask Paul next week. But one question we are getting, particularly for a lot of you, if you remember back, the HTM, securities adjustment for most banks has been, moot, right? That they haven't, it's probably not applicable to them given the fact that they just aren't buying securities, that there's this credit risk involved. So naturally, then the question we received is, do I need to establish a reserve account for you? I mean, I guess the simple answer is I would tell you yes, right? Because it's on the call report. It's part of the designed to be part of the, you know, the methodology. I would tell you yes. I mean, could you get away with not doing it? Sure, but I just don't know why you'd want to run the risk. You know, so I would tell you that yes, you should establish a reserve account even if you don't have anything. But again, we'll ask Paul next week about that on the coffee talk. But that is a question we've gotten since probably 90 to 95% of you. This will not be an issue, but I would tell you just as a best practice to make sure you're establishing that. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. Here's another one. Okay, yeah, here's a few. I'm going to give myself a second to read it. So Matt's question is basically, you know, is more of a gap question, but you know, now that there's an ACL for loans and the ACL for unfunded commitments are separate, he doesn't understand how one would ever utilize the ACL for unfunded commitments. Would you have to burn through your entire ACL for loans before you would ever dip into that? Yeah, I mean, again, I think you kind of in an ongoing process, you know, I think it's just a way to, again, potentially, you know, account for potential risk that's beyond your existing loan portfolio, right? I think that's really the idea. If you think back to why the ACL came into place, is because in the ACCL, in the incurred loss model, and this is where we get into a big banks, you know, community bank type of issue. But it's essentially readers of financial statements didn't trust the reserve process because it didn't take into account any of these potential unfunded commitments that, while they're not loans today, could be tomorrow. And so they, as a reader of financial statement, they didn't think it adequately reflected the reserve necessary. You know, yours is more of an operational question, so we'll talk to Paul about it next week. But you're essentially at any given time always going to have a portfolio and potentially unfunded commitment. So I think it's just a way to try to establish an additional level of
a theoretical risk, right? And it's a theoretical reserve. You're right. You can't have a loss on an unfunded commitment, right? It has to be funded, become a loan, and then become on the balance sheet as a loan, and then have a charge off, right? That's the way it would happen in practice, but they wanted to capture all areas of potential risk. And if you have an unfunded commitment that may become a loan that may have a loss, they have to find a way to capture that on the financial statements, and they do it through making you, establish a reserve. But you're right, the reserve, you're never going to have a charge off on it. The charge off would only happen once it's a loan, and that would happen in your ACL. So I think you'd never burn through that, right? Because it would never. It's there just to capture the additional risk, even though it's not going to be used as part of an actual, charge off or recovery. Is never going against that reserve.
Correct. Brent, yes. Good morning, Brent. Yes, as we discussed, we will get that, current allowance back, whether it's it'll more likely probably be on the summary page, but we will get that back out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, the plan there was to add on the historical page where we show the trends over time, was to add the allowance, the reserve and the reserve ratio as line items on the historical, so you can see the trend in reserve over time, not just have a single as of a certain point in time value showing on the summary page, but you can actually see the whole trend on the historical page. So that we'll be adding the reserve and reserve ratio to the historical and peer tabs in the near future.
Thanks, Brent. Question just on how other banks will treat unfunded commitments, probability of funding, regulators, expectation of allowance, et cetera. So, Connor, thanks for the question. This is actually something I think we'll have to wait and see, right? I think we designed, our approach to unfunded commitments the way we did, particularly because there's really been no guidance on how banks should do it. Again, if you remember in the ACCL, this was a optional analysis. And again, a very small percentage of banks conducted that analysis. as part of offering a tool to our banks, we will at least wanted to provide a way to think about these unfunded commitments. And that's what Steve did with the tool that he designed. Our expectation is, we've always said, you can account for these however you'd like, but as a provider, we needed to move something beyond just a white screen for you. So we designed our tool to offer a methodology of how you might do it. It is entirely possible that as the year goes on, or a year from now, there might be more of a provincial approach that the regulators suggest or auditors suggest. Again, we're going to be sensitive to that, and if there's something that we feel will more will improve upon what we're doing, we'll consider it. But I think that was really, there's really been no expectation or presentation on how banks should do this. So that's why we took the approach that we did. As I've told banks who had already been doing it, continue, if you're comfortable, analyzing this how you had in the ALLL, continue to do that, right? The guidance simply suggests that you need to do something. And that's why we presented it as, presented a way to accomplish that. Steve, anything you want to add there?
No, it's exactly that. The the regulators and we presented our suggested methodology for how to calculate an unfunded commitments in a manner that was appropriate for CECL to the examiner, to the regulators and FASB, and they looked at that and said that they thought that was reasonable, which gave us the comfort to share that as an approach with you. But if you look in the actual guidance from CECL, it doesn't go beyond, people saying, well, hey, does all this pertain to unfunded commitments too? And they go, oh yeah, you got to do that for unfunded commitments too, but not the follow-up question. Well, exactly how might I do that from a step-by-step standpoint?
Right. So again, I think just begs the, for me to say, which we have kind of said all along, right? There is going to be a life cycle and kind of an evolution to the ACL and CECL and all of this, right? Our focus initially was on getting everybody transitioned, which is what I think the regulators are going to be focused on for initially. A year from now, 2 years from now, three exam cycles, there's going to be probably, things that evolve or change as they see more, they determine what in their minds are best practices. We are going to be continually seeking out industry information, not only from regulators, from auditors, from other banks. And we're going to try to continue to improve our tool to make sure, we are sensitive to what you might encounter from third parties. So, again, I think our lesson obviously here is we'll try to do a much better job of communicating those changes to you as we approach them, but it is not going to stop us from continuing to seek out, ways that we can improve the tool, because we feel like we owe that to you, right? That we're going to be, it's incumbent upon us to continually improve the tool if we can. Okay, I don't see any other questions. If anybody has one, you can submit them now. If nothing else comes in, Steve, any final comments before we let everybody get back to their day, and then hopefully we'll see everybody next Friday on the coffee talk. Steve,
Yeah, any further questions that you have that might be helpful to kind of anonymously ask to an auditor, accountant, that'll be next Friday. Would be a great opportunity to do that and get those questions answered in real time.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you all for joining us this morning. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. If not, have a happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, and then we will see you on the coffee talk next Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.